Well, good day to you. It is September the 13th. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. My name is Gary Willing. I want to welcome you to SOP Save Our Planet. I also want to do a couple things before we get going, and both things are free for you to do if you so choose. The first thing that's free to do, and I do recommend this, I think this is the most important thing to do upon listening to these videos, especially if you're listening to it for the first time, is to get some better background information for yourself. Look into this information and see if it's true for you or not. If you go to the websites that I provided links for in the description portion of these videos, you get really good background information to see if what I'm saying is true to you, for you, right? So if you look at the Share International site, the link is at the very top. You get the best background information about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, about his priorities there than you can anywhere else. But you can go and venture out and look at some of the other information on some of the other websites. You know, you can see if what I claim about the Marshall Plan to be true. You can look and see if some of these things that I say about UFOs are true by checking out some of these websites. So hopefully you'll look into it, because like I said, it's free. It'll only take a little bit of time for you to look and investigate this information for you. And then the second thing, which is also free, is join the discussion. Post a comment. Let me know what you think. If you have a question you want to ask me, post your question in the comment section, and then I'll try my best to answer it in the next video. Or you can email me, searchforsigns@mail.com. All right. Now, I don't expect you to remember when I said this, but a few videos ago, I said that I was noticing how unexpected things were becoming, not only in the world, but in my own life. And it's getting to the point, if it hasn't already gotten there, that you really can't expect tomorrow or next week or next month to be anything about what you expected it to be, or even be the same as what today or next week or last month was like, right? I mean, you really can't hold on to this expectation that everything is just going to go swimmingly for the next month or the next week, or even, like I said, even the next day. Things are changing so rapidly. Things are breaking down so rapidly, you know, and it's not all bad. Some of it's actually kind of cool and kind of lovely, you know, and inspired in a way, you know, and I don't know about you, but I'm seeing it on both sides, you know. Most of what I'm seeing is stuff that is not pleasant, right? You know, the breakdowns of economic system, politically, you know, all the rhetoric and all those kind of things, and even some of the events that have happened recently, right, have led me to believe that you really cannot expect tomorrow or next week or next month to be what you think it's going to be like. Really, you can't hold on to that anymore. And I know the uncertainty is there. I've heard about it from some of you guys, but I've also heard about it from people in my own life about how, for them, it's becoming scary to the extreme. You know what I mean? And I think one of the benefits of knowing this information, even if you don't believe it as much as I believe it, it can give you a little bit of hope to kind of sustain you through some of these things. And because I don't think it's necessarily going to get the waters are going to get any smoother for the foreseeable future. I think it's going to be very, you know, it's going to be a roller coaster ride for a while. I'm just letting you know that. That's what I think is going to happen. But this week is a definitely reinforcing what I've been thinking about the future, how unexpected it is. Because last week at this time, I had no clue, even an inkling, that anything like what happened this week here in the United States and Utah with the shooting of Charlie Kirk was ever going to happen. And most political pundits always say, I didn't agree with anything that Charlie Kirk said. There were some things that he said that I was like, okay, I can kind of see where you're coming from, right? You know, the vast majority of the things that he said I didn't agree with, but I always admired him for creating this brand or this movement of who and what he stood for as quickly as he did and as young as he was. I mean, it's admirable, you know what I mean? And I would have said that last week, you know, about him, you know, but he didn't deserve to get shot in the way that he did. Nobody does, right? And now with the political rhetoric on both sides coming out, right, you can kind of start to see the motives of some of these people if you hadn't seen it before. But the one thing that I wanted to say, this is a commentary that you can go hear the commentary from the right or the left and get whatever side you resonate with to get you to agree, to reinforce what you already believed. But the one thing that you're not going to hear from the left and you're not going to hear from the right is what I'm about to say. And this is where I think knowing this information really is important. And that is, the need for peace is the most important thing that any one of us can work towards. Anything that we can do. The need for peace is the number one thing that the world should work towards. Our very future depends upon whether we do this or not. And there is nothing that the United States is doing, that Israel is doing, that Russia is doing, that any other country, there's nothing that the left is saying or the right is saying or doing that is bringing about peace, because they are still trying to do it the old way. And believe it or not, even the people who are marching for peace, yes, they got it right how important peace is, but they are still missing the most important piece of how to create peace, which is the principle of sharing. That's the only thing that's going to bring about justice and trust, and then eventually bring about global peace. And it's not just country to country, but eventually between groups and different groups, and then eventually individuals and individuals. There is no peace anywhere in the world. None. But it is vitally important that we stand up for peace. And if you think and you do some research and you look at the Marshall Plan and how it did bring about goodwill amongst the nations, might I suggest talking about how important the principle of sharing is. It is the most important thing that we do, but nobody's talking about it. Literally nobody's talking about it. Even those people who want justice and want peace and are working so desperately to create justice and peace are not talking about the most important part of it that's necessary for justice, the principle of sharing. It would end these, what just happened. That would have never happened had peace been established in the world. Never would have happened. All the needless deaths in Gaza would never happen if there was justice in the world. Never. And I know listening to this information, you might go, this is just so utopian. It's never going to happen in the real world and blah, 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 blah. But it can happen because it has happened. The one thing that will never happen is peace will never be established if we continue to do what we've always done. That is a certainty. So that's my two cents on this last week events, But hopefully you'll think about it. Hopefully you do a little research and look in to see if what I'm saying about the principle of sharing, bringing about justice and bringing about peace. But as Maitreya says, without sharing, there can be no justice. Without justice, there can be no peace. And without peace, there can be no future. All right, now let's get on to some questions. Let's see. All right, here's a question. If Maitreya is the Imam Mahdi and Jesus, how can there be two manifested beings of Jesus? The Jesus of the Bible and the Jesus of Islam. All right, so this is a bit of a confusion between who and what Maitreya is and Jesus. So Jesus and Maitreya are two different masters. And they've always been two different people. They've never been the same person. The way that these masters work is they work through telepathy. And one of the methods of telepathy is a method called overshadowing. Once the disciple is advanced enough to where they're able to be overshadowed by a master in this way, that's how they typically work. So the ideas and the thoughts and the words coming out of this very great disciple are more than likely the thoughts and the words and the wisdom of one of these masters, because the master is overshadowing them. Not everybody can be overshadowed. I know people think that channeling and overshadowing are the same thing. They're not the same thing. Channeling has to do with a disincarnated entity working through the astral vehicle of the person. Telepathy, from these masters' point of view, is a higher form of telepathy, and overshadowing is an even higher form of way that they work, because the disciple has to be on the Buddhic plane, which is not anywhere near what the astral plane is, the astral emotional plane. Everybody without exception on this planet can function and work almost unconsciously on the astral emotional plane of our nature, because it's so easy for us to do. It's just as easy as not. We don't have to think about moving our legs to walk typically, right? I mean, it's just automatic. It's the same thing with the emotions. We don't have to. It doesn't take any work for us to operate on the emotional plane. But the emotional plane is riddled with illusion and distortion. And it's something that humanity has been stuck in, this point of consciousness of the emotional plane, which is why part of the reason why I have so many problems in the world, because for most people, emotions are more real than ideas. They don't remember ideas like they remember emotional states. Does that make sense? And so forth. And people relate truth based on how they feel. So if they feel it is true, then they think it's true, and then a lot of times they can devote their whole life to that. Where they're intellectually, they could be contradicted by anything. By science or whatever it is, but if it doesn't feel right to them, then there's no truth to what's staring them right in the face, right? And this goes for pretty much everybody. But these masters don't work on the emotional plane. They work on the Buddhic planes, which is higher than even the mental planes, which is above the emotional plane. So there's the physical plane, the emotional plane, mental plane, and then the Buddhic plane. So a disciple like Jesus would have had consciousness on the Buddhic plane in order to be overshadowed by one of these masters, and he did. And so when Jesus was speaking to the people, it was Jesus's voice, but yet it might not have been Jesus speaking to them. It might have been Maitreya working through the then disciple Jesus speaking to the crowd. So most of the ideas, most of the truths in the Bible that Jesus spoke were coming from the Christ, just as most of the truths that Gautama Buddha was speaking were coming from the Buddha. Not saying every one of them, because Jesus was a very, very advanced disciple. I'm sure he was a very wise individual on his own right, but the extraordinary words of wisdom that are written down in the Bible are coming from the Christ, not from Jesus. So they're two different people, and even to today, they're two different masters. They work very, very closely together. According to Ben's master, they work moment to moment. They're not apart from one another at all in terms of their workload. But Maitreya is the master who is speaking to humanity. He is the head and leader of all the masters, but he's a master himself, and he's speaking to humanity right now on TV or through our media or radio or whatever it happens to be, but not claiming to be Maitreya. But once he does come out on the day of declaration and claim to be Maitreya, and then we'll all know who he is, then he'll start to introduce these masters one by one by one by one. And the Master Jesus, I think, will probably be the first one that he introduces. So we'll see that they're two different people. Now, Muhammad, who is credited with writing the Quran, of course, which a very large segment of the world that practice Islam believe that he is the source of the Quran. They're actually incorrect. It was Jesus that was working through Muhammad in the exact same way that Maitreya worked through Jesus when he was in Palestine. And we'll eventually understand it and have a much better understanding of the process of overshadowing to where it makes more sense. But for most people, it's, and there's nothing wrong with looking at the Christ and Jesus as one and the same. It's just esoterically, they're not the same. And people will look to Maitreya that are somebody like me that don't follow a particular brand of religion and have no problem seeing him as the esoteric Christ or a world teacher. Other people who perhaps are very deeply entrenched in their own religious beliefs won't look to him like that. But they might understand what he's saying to be true, and that either way is fine. You don't have to believe Maitreya in anything. Maitreya doesn't even want followers, so because he'll tell you, if you follow him or anybody else, you've lost yourself, so don't follow anybody. So anyway, hopefully that makes a little sense and sheds a little light to what the relationship. Like I said, there is a relationship between the two, but they are not the same person, or the same master. All right. Do you think Buddhists will recognize Maitreya? I think it would depend on the person, because I'm sure there are the problem with religion, and this is universal, really. It's not even necessarily religion, but the problem with belief is once we believe it and it feels true, it's very hard to change that. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't, because I know that there are things that I've believed 100% in that were wrong, and I had to look at the unreality of what I was believing, right? But for most people, they don't have the objectivity to be able to do that yet. Eventually they will, but they won't have the objectivity. Most people don't have the objectivity or the courage to look at their beliefs and go, that's not true. You know what I'm saying? What I've been telling people and what I've been thinking to myself and how I've been living my life is not true. It's very hard to do that, and it does take a tremendous amount of courage to do that. But, so will every Buddhist believe that Maitreya is Maitreya Buddha? Probably not all at first. But I do think they will have an easier time with it than, let's say, a Southern Baptist would in terms of seeing him as the Christ, And Maitreya is already for decades, up until from like the late 80s up until the invasion of Iraq in the early 2000s, he had visited almost every week different fundamentalist churches around the world, or synagogues or mosques or whatever, temples or whatever it is. Just depends on the, so he visited Hindu, it didn't matter. It was Hindus, Protestants, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, and they saw him and he appeared to them as their awaited teacher. Spoke to them for a little bit of time and then disappeared. So he appeared out of nowhere. And there was only one instance in the news that was covered, and that is the time in Nairobi, Kenya, where he appeared to the Maria Katsa church, who are fundamentalist Christians. She did not, when she had been told after that about Maitreya, did not believe anything about Maitreya. She saw, and they saw him as Jesus. So this picture of Maitreya with the white headdress and the blue little wrap around the head and so forth is how they imagine Jesus to come back, wearing those colors. That's why he wore that outfit that he wore. But there just happened to be a a journalist there filming or taking pictures of that church gathering at that time. And he appeared right as this picture that was taken right here was taken right when the journalist took the photo. Right when he took the photo of that gathering is when Maitreya appeared. So people think that's how Maitreya looks. That's not necessarily how he looks. That's how I imagine him to look. Actually, I've seen this picture so many times for 30 years that in my mind, when I imagine Maitreya, that's how he looks. Although I know that's not how he really looks. And I've seen him in different guises. He looks totally different than that, So I wouldn't look to him on TV to look like that, but that's how he looked. And then, nobody else pretty much has come forward and said that they had an experience where they had seen something at their church similar to what happened in Nairobi, Kenya. The funny thing is, and I interviewed this woman a couple times on our channel. She was a part of the Share International group in Texas. They put out, until Ben told them not to do this, but they put out an advertisement in one of their papers in Dallas, asking if anybody had seen in their church gathering something that sounded similar to what happened in Nairobi, Kenya, because Ben had reported that and claimed that Maitreya had appeared to a Protestant Southern Baptist church in Dallas, or in and around Dallas somewhere. And so they took it upon themselves to put an advertisement in the paper until Ben said, please don't do that. It's for them to come out and say something. But anyway, so they did. And they got a call from a woman who said that she was there and she saw it. And they were all blown away by what happened. But the ministers of the church urged the people not to say anything, to keep it private. So that's probably what's happened quite a bit with some of these things. So, but yes, he, the Buddhists were also, he appeared to Buddhists, fundamentalist Buddhists in their own way. And like I said, in most of these groups, when he would visit them, Ben would say, the crowd saw him as their awaited teacher, or they saw him as the Antichrist, or there was this mix between the two. Some people in the audience thought he was the Antichrist, some thought he was the Christ. Some were uplifted, some were fearful. I mean, it was a mixed bag in terms of the reception of what these people said. Now, in the Maitreya group, they all saw him as Jesus. It was pretty much universal throughout the group. And you can go on YouTube and you can actually listen to her talk about what happened. There's plenty of videos about it. Maitreya, and it happened in 1988, and it went all over the news wires of, I know it was reported on CNN, and it was reported on some other things, other news channels too. Okay, what is the source of evil on this planet? That's a good question. I can't, that would be a long discussion. And I can talk about the lords of materiality or the forces of darkness or whatever you want to talk about, but I can talk about how that's, what the Christians believe is the source of evil, being Satan or the devil and so forth. But I'm going to try to keep it as practical as possible, okay? And I'm going to relate it back to what happened on Wednesday. And I'm also going to relate it to what the response was to what happened on Wednesday with Charlie Kirk. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about why we have the divisions that we have, right? So it's not true to say, like when it comes to political divides or religious groups versus non-religious, or the science versus the mystic, or, racial groups that are divided and so forth. These divisions are coming not from evil, they're coming from the love nature of the Christ, bringing to the surface who and what we all are. And so we can see for ourselves who and what we all are, and it can't be hidden anymore, and it's very painful. And Ben's master talked about this decades ago, how painful this division process will be. But it's absolutely necessary for humanity, in order for humanity to make a choice. Do we continue on in the way that we're doing and destroy all life on this planet, or do we try the principle of sharing, and what will that mean? So that's why we have to have the divisions that we're having. He even said it seems counterintuitive, but it's absolutely essential that we go through this process as a humanity. So the divisional sides, one side claims that the other side is evil, the other one claims that the other side is evil, is not evil. So and I do a lot of study about the political, situation here in the United States. So I'm very aware of what the right think and very aware of what the left think. But neither side is truly evil. Now, within the political parties, there is a evil, nefarious influence that's influencing their actions, for sure, right? Just as there's a nefarious energy that's influencing the actions of the Pentagon and the Zionist movement in Israel and what's going on in Eastern Europe. There is a direct correlation between a nefarious energy of the forces of darkness and the lords of materiality and the work and the activity of certain groups within those areas. The Pentagon in the Zionist movement in Israel and in Eastern Europe. I mean, and how that's affecting everything around the world geopolitically. And it destabilizes peace, it creates injustice, it creates genocide in certain areas and so forth based on the activities of those points of darkness, for sure, right? But the people, the movements of the people that are divided because of this energy, so to speak, of the Christ, is not evil. So it's not true to say that people that follow and vote for Trump are evil, or people that vote Democrat are evil. And believe me when I tell you this, I've heard people on both sides claiming that the other side is evil. But it's not evil. It's just the divisions that we're seeing. And the root cause of all is the belief that we are separate from one another, is really the root cause. So that is the root cause of all evil, is the belief, the false belief that you're separate from somebody else. The other thing too that I would say, and this is something that I wanted to say in relation to what led up to this week, and what's happened, what will be happening in subsequent weeks, is both sides think that they are doing the most good. They can't both be totally different, can't see both sides of the issue, and be doing the ultimate good for the world. They can't, right? I mean, it's impossible. So what is the most ultimate good? And that's where I would say it really boils down to one thing: the need for unity, the need for love. That is the ultimate good that anybody should be striving for. There is nothing that is evil about that. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Republican or a Democrat, black or white, American or non-American or whatever. It doesn't matter what the divisions are. If you are seeking unity, you are seeking the highest good for anybody. But when you think that you're doing the highest good and you're trying to divide people because of your own, beliefs being different from somebody else's beliefs, that's not the highest good. It's not evil, but it's not the highest good that you could be doing. And a lot of times it can be destructive. And if you read in the Bible, Paul even said, even Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light. And that's what it is. That's what he's talking about. You think you're doing the best that you possibly could be doing for everybody, but yet it's selfish in intention. Or it's destructive, however you want to look at it, right? But it's so important for us to look at the need for unity, to talk about the need for unity and oneness, and the need for peace, and the need to bring about the principle of sharing. These will totally transform life on planet Earth. But the way that we've been doing things, the ways of the past, aren't working, will never work, and will never bring about peace. So therefore aren't the highest good for humanity. Does that make sense? I love you guys. Thank you very much for your questions. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to putting up videos in the very near future. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.